What's your poison? Say it straight.
Welcome to What's Your Poison,
What's
the
your
show where people that disagree on everything agree it's best to do so over a drink. My name's Peter Lewis. I'm the director of the progressive agency Essential. Joining me is my evil twin, who is the principal of General Strategic and former Morrison advisor, Dame Damjanowski. Hey, Dame, how's your week and what's your poison?
It's been an excellent week, Peter. I am very happy to say my poison this week is colloquially known as the lemon weapon, that I still refer to as a hard solo, but political correctness makes me call a hard rated now, as though that will somehow fool the children. What about yourself? What are you drinking this week?
Well, I've been told I've got to cut down the number of drinks I'm having. So instead, I've got a very large Sapporo black beer, but I am also pouring it into, I don't know if the camera can see it, a pewter that was handed down from my late father. That's my favorite thing. Traditionally, beer was meant to taste better in a pewter. I think there's been health studies saying there's high lead content. It's probably not so good for your health, but I still choose to toast Kev through the pewter. So
Here's a toast to
bottoms up.
Kev. And I will say that
Kev.
pewter is significantly underrated. Having been to Malaysia and explored all the Royal Salonga stores, I'm a huge fan of pewter, but it's not a thing anymore. I think it's one of
I
those
drank it out for
crafts that has gone by the wayside.
I've got a friend that does Oktoberfest every year in his backyard. He's a home brewer, Jason, and I always bring it. And I feel like Graham Kennedy in The Party, where he turns up to that election night party with the pewter on a chain around his neck, and it all gets worse from there. And that kind of sums up Jason Hardy's Oktoberfest as well.
It's amazing. And now, Peter, we have an amazing guest this week who you know quite well, and I've never met face to face, but have long admired. So give us a bit of an introduction into Lenore, and then Lenore can obviously give us a bit of an introduction to herself.
I remember noticing Lenore's work years and years ago at an ALP national conference down in Hobart. She probably doesn't even remember it, but she was a perky Fin Review, probably political correspondent, and she was on top of it, and all the craggy old guys were running around and Lenore ruled the roost. I got to know Lenore better when she became the first Australian editor of Guardian Australia about a decade ago. And we have worked together with the Guardian Essential Report and my columns, and it's been great sort of catching in and out with her. And now that journey's over. So it's great to have Lenore here to reflect on her time at The Guardian, but also drink some drinks with us on a Friday. But what's your poison, Lenore, before I ask you about how you're feeling?
I was just going to say that's a very kind introduction, Peter. And also, I think I've got like half a cupboard full of pewter and I know where to bring it now. That's excellent. My poison is a 4 Pillars Shiraz gin, the alcoholic kind, as it is Friday. I have the bandwagon kind for other days, and as you can see from the lipstick mark, I've already had a sip.
That is it's a fantastic
Do you
gin.
mix it or do you go straight?
No, it's got tonic.
Oh, tonic. We were drinking it straight the other day, but
The fever tea, I hope.
yeah.
Now, Lenore,
Yes.
Congratulations on your amazing run at The
Thank
Guardian.
you.
I'm so curious as a coalition staffer long
I'm
gone.
taking a drink before this question. Hang on, keep
That's
going.
right. No, I'm curious about the start of The Guardian as Australia, The Guardian Australia, because obviously the rumor mill and as it was published in the memoirs, The Guardian Australia was a brain fart of number 29 PM Malcolm Turnbull, who on a weekend decided that he wanted a Guardian in Australia. So as Mr. Turnbull does, makes a couple of phone calls here, there, wherever else, and suddenly things move into motion, and here we are with a Guardian. What's the inside story, or at least what you're allowed to tell us of it?
I think I can tell you all of it that I know. And I think brain fart's a little bit unkind. I think Malcolm was communications spokesperson or minister. It was in 2012. Thought that there should be better media diversity in Australia. He had a conversation with Alan Rusbridger, who was then the global editor-in-chief of The Guardian, and said, why don't you set up in Australia? And Rusbridger said, well, we don't have, that's not going to be financial. And he said, what if I could find a philanthropic partner to start you? And then he put Graham Wood, the philanthropist, in touch with Alan Rusbridger. And then really Malcolm departed the scene at that point. I mean, there's sometimes his telling me leaves him around a bit longer. But he really just facilitated that introduction. They then did a deal. Graham gave us the startup loan for The Guardian, and this all took sort of more than a year. And that was where it started.
Yeah,
and,
right.
at the start, it was truly insane. Like, we were tiny. It was a risk. I always tell the story how Greg Hywood told me that I was being an idiot for leaving the Sydney Morning Herald, and that no masthead would ever succeed in Australia other than News Corp and Nine, or Fairfax as it then was.
Yeah.
And at the time, I've got to say, there was a good chance he might have been right. There was no guarantee, but I'm happy to say now it's the fourth biggest site in Australia with nearly 9 million unique readers a month, and that's
which is
really great.
amazing. And sorry, just for those who don't know, so Graham Wood, he was the What If
guy?
Yeah. What happened to What If? Is that still around?
He sold it ages ago. I don't think
still use it.
I don't think it is.
It's still a website.
I figured you still go down to a travel agent, Peter. I figured you went down for one of those plastic
I prefer
envelopes where they give you the printed tickets.
When I really care, I do. No, 10 years is a journey, and I've been privileged to be on it for a fair bit. But a few things people don't know about The Guardian. Run as a trust, and its only objective is the promotion of journalism. It's also got this extremely novel business model where you give something away for free, but then you ask people to pay for it. So it's very counterintuitive. What's your reflections on the role it sort of dug into the Australian media at a time? When you were coming in, News Limited was putting up the paywalls. Fairfax was trying to work out what it was going to be. The ABC was totally under assault, and then you sort of come into the middle of it. And if Malcolm Turnbull was a media mogul, he was a pretty bad one because it was not his mouthpiece in any shape or form.
No.
What's the reflections on where the journey it's been on over that decade, and where you see it sitting now?
I think we launched at a pretty fortuitous time. It was when Fairfax had been a sort of progressive centre-leftish kind of publication. I think they were moving more towards the centre. And News Corp clearly...
Costello became chairman. And
exactly. So, there was The Guardian used to hate me saying this, but there was a sort of Guardian-shaped hole in the market for us to go into. That said, it was, that was the decade where we got absolutely smashed by the digital platform. So it wasn't an easy run by any means. I actually, very soon after I became editor, your friend and mine, Dan Stinton, and I launched the Reader Revenue Program here, so that, asking people to give us money for something they could get for free. And again, I remember the Australian was writing all these articles about they used to call us the left-leaning, loss-making Guardian Australia, London-based Guardian Australia, that is now putting out the begging bowl. Well, we don't make a loss anymore. We probably are left-leaning. And the begging bowl wasn't a begging bowl. It was actually a really great way to create a proper relationship with your readers, a relationship of trust, and communicate with them and, say that you appreciated what they did.
But also
against all predictions, it worked, and it's now, I think, sort of 60% of the revenue.
But it also means you're not chasing clicks. Like if your primary thing is not to get the next eyeball. I know you've got an advertising stream as well.
It's still 45% advertising, so we still want
you still
traffic.
Do clickbait.
But as the whole kind of AI summaries goes on, I think that trust relationship of people coming back to you because they trust you, because they really want your journalism as opposed to everything else that's flooding into their feed, that reach for reach's sake is less important, and a proper loyal relationship, a really engaged relationship with readers becomes more and more important.
To some degree, you could argue that's also just you reinforce my worldview, therefore I'll give you money, right? Not necessarily an individual article, but your overall vibe reinforces my overall vibe, and that's why I'll financially support you.
Or maybe you could say, I like your fact-driven, trustworthy journalism, and that's why I support you.
You could dress it up any which way you want, but it's not a criticism by any stretch. I think they all do it.
Yeah.
How was The Guardian regarded by the Prime Minister's office when you were working there? Like, I'm assuming it wasn't, oh my God, The Guardian's got a headline today. But was it, like, how was it regarded?
To be honest, Peter, I wasn't in the media team, but from what I saw of it, I don't think it really played into the consideration of the Morrison government in any real way, shape, or form. And again, I don't mean that as neither a criticism nor an accusation towards the media team at the Morrison government. Like, I just genuinely don't think it played a particular part in it, i.e., doesn't matter what we do, the Guardian's going to shit on us, so why bother? I think that came to a head, and again, there's no accusations, just observation is, I think when Scott did his
Went to Hawaii.
his I don't hold a hose mate moment, which was not one of his finer moments for sure. I think the team pointed out at some point that the Guardian simultaneously had lambasted Tony Abbott for getting in on the fires rather than doing the prime ministerial job, and then lambasted Scott Morrison for not getting in on the fires.
I don't think Tony Abbott was PM under the Guardian, was he? Maybe.
No, I think, don't you mean as a firefighter?
As a firefighter, as a volunteer, yeah.
Yeah, I don't remember that, but I'll take your word for it.
It's one of those things where like the same situation had happened, but when it was Tony, they were like, you shouldn't be down on the front lines, you should be doing the prime ministerial job. And then when Scott did it, it was like, no, you shouldn't be doing the prime ministerial job, you should be getting in there. And it was one of those moments that reinforced the, I think, conservative view of, doesn't matter what we do, the Guardian's never going to be on our side. And I think it just didn't factor into equations.
Jules just wanted to know it was criticising Tony for having a hero complex. So there you go. Thank you, Jules. In the booth. Sorry, one more thing that I wanted to go to, which now my mind is escaping because that went there. Did Malcolm keep an active interest in the Guardian through that period, particularly when he was PM? Like did you have relationships or not?
I mean, I spoke to him as a journalist so I finished in the press gallery in 2016, so that last election, and I spoke to him as a journalist and periodically as an editor, but he had no say, he had no sway. You know, I would talk to him as I talk to other people.
Talk to him as I talk to any other
Vaucluse
resident.
Celebrations as a, on big occasions, we invited him along. If that's what you mean.
Before we move on, just one other, I remember what my thought was. Everyone thinks it's a mirror image, the Australian on the right, cheerleader for the government, Guardian on the left, cheerleader for the left. And what was always frustrated me as a spin doctor, as opposed to like a pollster, is the Guardian doesn't play it like that. They actually are just as hard on sort of the left as they are on the right, notwithstanding. I don't think it's I don't know what you think, Lenore, having worked in News Limited as well.
I would absolutely agree with that. And I used to really rail at any comparison like that, in that, sure, we come at things from a centre-left position and the Oz comes at things from a right position, but we didn't run campaigns like the Oz did. And I think we were probably a bit more even-handed than the Oz, in my opinion.
Fair,
and before we move on to the news of the week, Peter, I want to thank you for that Freudian slip where you accidentally alluded to the fact that the Australian supports the government and that the centre right is the natural party of government, which it is, but that's fun.
Well, it's been my life experience anyway. Yeah.
Can we, if you don't mind, I'd love to move on to the news of the week. Yeah. Most importantly, this incredible, batshit crazy upcoming Farah by-election where basically, let's be honest, the two major parties are not playing a role in it. We have Michelle Millthorpe, who by all standards looks like an outstanding candidate for the region. If you're in the city component of the region, arguable how it is on some of the other parts of Farah. And then Daly, the One Nation candidate who ran for Labor at some point or wanted to run for Labor, seems to be slipping up left, right and centre. His supporters getting into fights with senators. Like, this is going to be an amazing weekend, I'm hoping.
I thought that was the meme of the election. Like, two parties that have swapped preferences getting into fisticuffs outside a polling booth. That is so good.
But if you get right down to it, the thing that I find really interesting is that the two, like David Farley and Michelle Millthorpe, look to me, both of them, like quite reasonable local candidates. And they kind of are interested in the same things. Like, they both oppose water buybacks. They're both worried about water security. They both want more funding for the Albury Hospital. But then the national kind of political overlay comes on top of it. And one side, Labor's Michelle Millthorpe as a teal because she took some money from Climate 200. And I just listened to the podcast interview with her just then. She sounds like a pretty average, rural regional candidate who knows her area. And then David Farley gets slammed because he was supportive of Michelle Milthorpe last time and toyed with the Labor Party at some point. So there's kind of this national political fight being played out through these two proxies who, if you left them alone, either of which might be quite decent local candidates.
Mm.
And now, Peter, you're a pollster. Have you got any predictions for it before we move any further?
So I can't. We don't poll seat by seat because robo-polling is shit and everything else is really expensive. But I'll give you something that has given me pause for thought. And let's mark this. It could just be pub talk. Ben Rao, who runs the tally room, I was sort of talking to him the other week because I was sort of doing a quick cheat before I did an interview on this. And I said it's obviously one of the first ever elections where it's a two-horse race between an independent and a one-nation candidate. And he said, just watch this. While it looks like the Libs are coming third, it's basically two elections. It's the Albury election, which, just to mark that, home of
Yep.
the birthplace of the Liberal Party, where it is a Liberal teal contest. And then in the regions, it's a one nation Liberal contest. And he was just saying, just watch it. That in that scenario, the idea that even though the Libs are polling the third in primary vote, that the idea that they will be the first ones out, don't bank on that. And if that's the case, it's still a three-horse race. So I hate to offer you false hope.
I'm so glad you said
there's
that,
something
because
interesting going on there.
Interesting.
I think it's really easy to flatten this into a one nation versus teal, as you pointed out, Lenore. Teal, maybe tealish, teal tinged kind of candidate. But in actual fact, there's so many layers of things happening here. Number one, it's the first election, a first test of Angus's leadership in a real sense, right? This is a seat that, has been a Liberal seat for quite a long, I think 25 years or whatever at this point. So losing that is still a loss, right? Under Angus's watch. Canavan, the Nats are actually campaigning pretty hard for their candidate, even though they're not getting a lot of traction. The Nats still see Farah as a natural seat for the Nationals Party, and it should be a Nationals Party seat.
It was Tim Fisher's seat.
It was Tim Fisher's seat, right? So
it was the seat of the Deputy Prime
exactly right.
Minister.
So it's a bit of a
30 years
test
ago.
of Canavan's leadership.
Mm.
If you accept then that Milthorpe is a Teals candidate by extension of the fact that she accepted some Climate 200 money, depending on how you define a Teals candidate, it's a good test for deep regional ability for the Teals to break through. Not necessarily the first one, like we had Wannon, we had Cowan, we had a few other ones, but it is still a test of them. And it's kind of the first federal seat test of One Nation since they've come to this newfound surge. So there's 4 semi-tests all happening concurrently, and I'm not sure the results are going to give us a clear answer on all 4 of them, but someone's going to win.
Wouldn't you think Michelle Milthorpe's a lot more like a Voices Of candidate, like Cathy McGowan, then Helen Hayes, like those sorts of people?
So this is a point I was going to make, Lenore. So I actually did my cadetship on the Border Morning Mail.
We have an expert in the ranks.
Back in the day where it was very much the paper for Albury and Wodonga, and it was very much seen as the same region. Amazing paper. It used to have 8 photographers. You used to go out on the road and just do, it's a different story. But if you look at the Wodonga side of it, is actually now Cathy McGowan, Helen Haynes territory. And that it's much more that area, the Murray area, is a thing rather than New South Wales, Victoria. And I think what's happened there, and I actually think this is why the Libs have chosen to preference One Nation, because in terms of if they lose that to a Helen Haynes style candidate, they're never getting it back, like it's off the map.
Sure, but
whereas
One
Nation will implode and they'll probably be a one-term seat. So that would be their calculation, I think.
I think it is, but I'm interested in your view, Damien, about the decision there, because aren't they weighing up 2 bad options? Like preference Michelle Milthorpe, and their base might get mad and she might dig in and become a sort of long-term candidate. But on the other hand, preferencing One Nation means that if they win and get all that momentum and validation, which really eats into the coalition's credibility nationally, they facilitated it. I find it I don't get the decision myself.
Well, it ultimately, I think, becomes a political calculus of, can One Nation gain enough momentum to be a significant block on a federal level, or will it also be a slightly smaller than the Nationals party party on the right? And if it is that latter one, then they're going to support the coalition, not the Labor Party, ultimately, right? So better them than an independent where they could swing either way. And I think the real thing here is the winner of these tests, no matter what, is Albo, because he very cleverly decided, you know what, we're not running a candidate. We'll let the right eat itself, have
Can duke it
fun.
out. Yeah.
We will all watch from a distance and enjoy it. And you got to hat tip him for what was him and Paul Erickson for what was a strategically genius decision to just step the fuck out of it and go, this is between y'all.
Why
Mm.
would you go into a 5-horse race? Like that's the other bit, that the Libs and the Nats both competing. But I just on preferences, Lenore, I wonder if Ben Rao is right, then the Libs calculation is who is going to come third
Mm.
rather than and
they think
so,
they could still hop over.
And so if so the scenario, and this I very
But you
rarely
have
say
to play
this
as if you're going to win,
sentence,
right? There's no point in playing unless you're playing
so
to
if you're
win. There's no
playing
other
to
purpose.
win, you are saying who's going to come third, One Nation's going to come third, therefore I get their preferences, therefore that's my best chance of holding the seat.
But but Peter, you know, that's the only way you can
They are
run it.
geniuses, and I very rarely put those words in the same sentence.
But that's the only, like, you do not run a candidate and put a lot of your donor money into a campaign unless you genuinely believe there's a pathway to either win or to stop your opposition, right?
Who
And
is
if
the
the only
Liberal
pathway
candidate?
to
I
win
wouldn't
is
even know.
who?
Trivial pursuit.
Rakowski?
Was that the name?
Oh, sorry, Butkowski. I mixed up.
Butkowski.
Racer Butkowski.
No,
I just
Carl
portmanteaued her first
Bonovich.
and last name. Apology.
Class.
One of my Slavic
You
peoples.
could run a bot.
And
Yeah.
then Robertson for the Nats. So, look, either way, for the people out there who are sad and pathetic enough, like myself, to be watching it on a Saturday night, I think it's going to be a fun bit of viewing.
If there is a Venn diagram of sad and pathetic people watching our podcast and watching on Saturday night, I reckon they're right here. So tip. So what's your tip? Dome and then Lenore.
I actually think Milthorpe's going to come out on top. I don't think it'll be a huge margin, but I do think that she'll get a run at the last minute of support.
Because of this revelations about Farley, or just because
I think it's a
she's
combination of
campaigning
the revelations, and I think there's just actually a lot of quiet supporters in the community who've been supporting Milthorpe through quite a few cycles now, who just didn't want to get into the muck of what the loud conversation in the media, who are just quietly supporting Milthorpe.
Interesting. I think One Nation might do it.
We'll find out in just over 24 hours, interestingly. Peter, what else have you got from your reflections from the week?
I guess my tip, I'm not going to tip the Libs. Like, I just can't. I think it will be Milthorpe, but I'm interested. And if the Libs win, Ben Rao is a bigger genius than I already think he is. So...
Well, for your Saturday night viewing pleasure, Damien, I was talking to Casey Briggs the other night because I did the ABC's Party Room podcast. They had a sort of live event for their 10th birthday.
Is that,
and
sorry,
he
that's
was
Anthony,
saying
Anthony Green Jr.
Yeah,
Anthony Green Jr. He's got every booth plotted. Like, they've got a full, almost like federal election do-up for the by-election.
That's how you know we're giving the ABC too much money. Peter, tell me about some of the interesting stuff you noticed from the week. I know there's been a few sad stories as well.
It's the second week in a row where there's a First Nations tragedy. This was the death of a newborn baby in a series of huts on the Murrumbidgee River in Wagga Wagga, so just out of Farah. The week after the tragic and then murder of the little girl up in Alice Springs and the riots there. And it has got me thinking about where we've gone over the last 3 years and the failure of the Voice referendum. No, I'm not saying having a voice would have stopped these deaths happening, but it's got me reflecting how we've gone backwards on our relationship with our First Peoples. I was, as you know, heavily involved in the campaign, and I kind of got blindsided when it all fell over in the day. But it was actually about stuff like this, and the failure of the campaign was that people didn't see it being about stuff like this. And it's just, like, on one level, just incredibly sad news. I think also the political establishment just shrugs their shoulder. The other bit that's been happening, particularly in New South Wales, with, as we discussed last week, my least favourite Labor government ever, has been the, jailing of young kids in Moree, now the drone surveillance of the activities up there. And again, no Indigenous involvement in the solutions, which was, to my mind, what the idea of the voice was about. So I guess my reflection is that there are consequences when people get the politics wrong. I know a lot
Yeah.
of First Nations people who really have felt disengaged and deflated. And there are a lot of reasons why that went wrong, including the fact that Albo politicised it on election night by making his first promise. It was also because the Libs were on board and then they weren't on board. But the consequences are significant. And I don't know, Lenore, you guys at The Guardian did a lot of fantastic reporting on these sorts of issues, but it feels like we've gone backwards.
Well, I thought there was always a kind of false binary between the voice and tangible outcomes. Like the no case always tried to say that one of the reasons the voice was pointless or you should vote no was because it wouldn't lead to tangible outcomes. And the point was obviously the voice would give First Nations people a better say in policies about them, but it was never going to, solve everything overnight. I guess I know both of the stories you mentioned are terrible tragedies and make you incredibly sad. But I would really like to hope that this outpouring of sadness and grief actually leads to something changing. And it's interesting the stories that capture that national imagination. You have young Indigenous kids incarcerated at record levels. In terrible circumstances, you have all kinds of tragic circumstances, but there's sometimes these stories that just kind of capture the imagination. And if that's the impetus it takes to get something to change, then, I suppose that is a small positive in a horrible story.
What's your observations of where the Liberals stand on First Nation stuff now? And you probably want to call it Aboriginal anyway, Damo, but no, and where the party ended up after sort of being in for the yes vote and then going to the no? Or do you see any
Look,
line to where they are now?
Yeah, I think painting them all as one big cohort who agrees on Indigenous questions is probably a bridge too far. There's clearly a divide within the party, the coalition side of stuff, between those who were supporters of the voice and those who were uncertain or no votes on the voice. Obviously, we had some frontbenchers stand down as a result of that. We had people who wanted to do a conscious vote, all that kind of thing. I don't think it's fair to try and categorize everyone on the center right as having a constant view or a consistent view on all things Indigenous affairs and all things the voice. I will say I don't know enough about this field to be able to talk to it with any authority. I think the Alice Springs incident was...
Why do you need to know anything? Isn't that the Australian way, just to talk feels?
Well, yeah, but this is one of those things where I go, there is a degree of white guilt here where I go, I don't know where that line stops and the genuine concern begins. Like, and again, this is going to sound bizarrely out of school, but I know for years that we've been, as far as I remember, since I came to Australia, is the idea of giving Indigenous people agency over where they live, how they live, their way of life, and as far as I understand it, the Alice Springs tragedy was of the community, by the community, in the community, without a whole bunch of external intervention. And then all of a sudden, when something bad happens, a lot of white people in Canberra go, why didn't we know? Why didn't we do something about this? Where were we, us white people, in this process? It's like, well, do you want to give them agency, or do you want to intervene and tell them how to raise their kids? Like, what's the precedent? And this is a genuine question, not me pontificating, by the way. Like, I don't know how to navigate this.
I mean, I think we expect in Indigenous or non-Indigenous communities that governments intervene if children are at risk. And I think the Northern Territory government has actually announced a review into the children's services and how they dealt with that particular family. So I don't know that there's actually, that people are looking at it differently necessarily than if a similar death had happened in a non-Indigenous community.
But involvement in the community, for a lot of people of the community, where generally they prefer not to have government involved in it, is an imposition where you're going, well, for us to be involved and to keep your children safe, the government has to be involved, which means we now need to impose yourself in the old timers camp in some way, whether that's just a regular check-in or whatever it is. That's still the government.
Wasn't that the intervention? Wasn't that Abbott's intervention? Which
Well,
didn't work either.
Well, but the Northern Territory government funds the old timers camp, and the Northern Territory Community Services is involved in those families. I mean, that is already happening, is it not?
But then is it just a failure of process? Is that what happened here?
Well, I don't know, but the Northern Territory government has launched an inquiry to find out what happened, because there was some details about the Kumanjai little baby's family leaked, which suggested that there had been previous reports. I don't really want to go into it because it was leaked private information, but I think that was what prompted the investigation by the Northern Territory government. But it looked to me, and again, I mean, I'm also not an expert, but it looked to me like a similar process that you would see if a similar tragedy happened in any other community.
Absolutely. So, and I guess, Lenore, this is where I struggle, again, being a off-the-boat immigrant here and not knowing how to navigate the complexities of the Australian guilt landscape and the Indigenous landscape. Is Indigenous communities asking for a very high level of agency and decision-making over their communities and how they raise their kids and their culture and all these other things. But then simultaneously us collectively going, well, but there still has to be a level of protection for children and the vulnerable and all this other kind of thing. That means at some point you have to draw a line, and oftentimes those two lines will overlap. When they overlap, should the collective protection take charge, or should the agency of the Indigenous communities take precedence? And how do we make that decision? That's where I struggle.
But also who makes the decision, right?
And who makes the decision? And does that change government to government, or by what colour the government is?
And the proposition of the voice was, or are those decisions from the bottom up rather than the top down, given that the bottom down. Can I give you my take on the whole failure of the voice? It's a little rant, but we're over drinks. It's the allegory of the MCG. One of the famous days in the Australian Union movement was in just before the 2007 election with the Rights at Work campaign, where the union movement half filled the MCG for a day of protest. And the genesis of that was, I claim some guilt for this. One of my key jobs as a union spin doctor was crowd inflation. So whenever there was a protest, I would work my contacts with the police association and always get a factor of 5 amplification. So if there's 100
and Donald
people,
Trump.
100 people, you get 500. 1,000 people, you got 5,000. 10,000, we'd claim 50,000, and it would be printed in the paper. During work choices, there were some serious rallies. Melbourne got 50,000 at one point, and we claimed 250,000, 250,000, and it was printed in the papers. We got 250,000. And then, so the ACTU, Greg Conbay said, we've got 250,000. Let's book out the MCG. We can fill it because it's only 100,000 seats. So the day comes along, and we only half fill it, and everyone's looking for the excuse. It's raining, the trains were late. No, everyone was there. It was just that we believed our own bullshit, and we only ever had half an MCG. And the reason that's an allegory, I think the problem, we were doing fine with our engagement with First Nations. Everyone believed that we were more further down the road than we was, but then we decided we have to put it to a vote. And we couldn't fill the MCG. We did not get the numbers to get there. And I feel like that is a lesson in when we're in the middle of something, we believe what we want to believe because we're around everyone else that agrees with us.
Yes.
I guess, I think we've all sort of, no one here is claiming, very deep expertise in Indigenous service delivery. I guess I feel uncomfortable with any analysis that sort of looks like it could be blaming the family for the death of the girl. Like it was a terrible situation, and clearly there were failures there. But it was a family that loved that little girl, and I just think you have to be careful not to look like you're blaming them.
Absolutely. And sorry, just building on Peter's thing as well, because I think, Lenore, your point's really good, but just not connecting it to the voice. But I think Peter, I agree with you. The echo chamber effect is very real. And on The
Which
Voice,
wasn't just progressive politics; it was corporate Australia as well. We were all there.
oh yeah,
to bring
we
the
flew
nation
on the
with us.
Qantas planes that said yes on the side of them while they overcharged us for the breakfast biscuit. If it's even a biscuit anymore, I think you now just get a few crumbs in a packet and they call
Do you
that
get
breakfast.
biscuit? God.
No, it's a piece of banana bread. But why didn't Albo just legislate this bloody thing first, demonstrate that it worked, and then take it for a vote? Why would you tactically fuck up in that way? And it was a fuck up, and we can say that in retrospect, where like the ambition was great. I don't deny him the ambition, but the statistics of referendums succeeding in Australia is very thin. Legislate the thing. Show that it's functional, show that it's not a threat, and then take it to the vote. What the fuck was that about?
Yeah. It was caught up
Hubris?
on the
Like,
day. No, I don't even think. I think it was. There was this genuine sense within Labor that in 3 terms we could. It was almost Keating-esque that we'd do Voice, then Republic, and then Treaty, and there was this momentum. And it was a classic thing that you misread the mandate. The mandate was because no one liked your boss. Like
Yeah.
that was really what that election. It was,
and they were tired of COVID bullshit. There was a
they
big
didn't
part
like
of
your
that as
boss
well.
either.
They didn't like the boss, but there was a lot of COVID wrapped in that.
But I don't know. Like I believed it. I thought we would have 3 terms, that we'd be moving Australia to a better place. And it didn't happen.
So
And it
do
hasn't
you think
happened.
that as a result has now killed off the Republic movement as well?
Lenore,
You
what do you
can't.
reckon?
I do not think you can have a Republic referendum before there's some sort of, in recognition of Indigenous Australia. So I think, yeah,
So Lenore, are you a Republican? May I ask you? Is that a
I
very
am.
personal question?
Absolutely. Yes, I am.
Are you
So,
Dame, or are you a constitutional monarchist?
Okay, I'm going to tell you, as a conservative, I should be a monarchist. As a centrist, I should be a Republican. I am down the line on this. I love the idea of a republic. No one's yet to convince me on a great model for who we'd pick as our head of state, because I don't want politicians picking. And
Isn't
you know what?
the US a great working model of what it could look like if you had a popular elected?
But the thing is, I also love the monarchy, not for any other reason that I think heritage is important. I think history is important. I think the idea of people who are meant to represent our better angels and our greater demons is important.
Better
Where-
angels? Have you
Yeah.
had a look at them lately?
I'm sorry, but you
Man,
can't,
man.
no. You can't
They're a
shit
bunch
on
of
Lizzie.
grifters.
Lizzie was an example of an upstanding
Andy?
civic participant
Yes.
for the better part, like for 3/4 of a century.
You
And I
clearly
also
watched
have a
The
bit of a
Crown.
soft spot for Charles, I've got to say, but I don't see what he's got to do with us. That said, it's not high on my list of, high priorities for reform. Like, yes, I'm a Republican. I'm not going to die in a ditch on doing it sooner rather than later.
I reckon the timing of was it 98 or 99, Lenore?
I
can't-
think.
98. So, and Howard played it like a song, and Reethy split the vote. That was brilliant way of killing it. But it was at a time when globalization was peaking, the end of history, like people going, why do we need to reconsolidate the nation state? I think there will be, off the back of this, the crisis and the breakdown of American influence, there is going to be a departure back into nation states. And I am curious, I'm not predicting, but I think over the next decade, the idea of why it may come back in some form as the world reconfigures. And I think sovereignty and nationalism are going to become a thing again, more than they have been over the last.
Isn't that important though? Have we not proved globalization not great? Like from the progressive side of politics, have we not figured out, hey, getting that $20 t-shirt at Cotton On is costing some poor Vietnamese kid, their fingers, their effort, and they're only getting $1 in it. Like, haven't we proved the globalization thing ain't all it's cracked up to be? Like, how do you reconcile that progressive side of like?
I've always
nations-
been anti-globalization, but
I mean,
Trump's a champion to kill globalization. Sorry, Lenore.
I'm interested in what you think, Peter, though, about whether a republic could precede any recognition of Indigenous, because I don't see how it can.
Unless it goes hand in hand and contiguous.
Well, you want to run a 2-pronged referendum. Woohoo.
Sorry,
I don't know.
Always
explain to
ambitious.
the dumb guy in the room why the Indigenous recognition stuff has to come first.
I think it would be a difficult ask to not prioritize it, to not, like it would be a difficult ask to not prioritize it. I think in terms of national identity, many people would see it as a more important thing to do.
Genuine question, because again, like I came here in the early 90s from Yugoslavia. So do you think most Australians associate the Indigenous identity as part of their Australian identity?
I think most Australians think that, First Nations as Aboriginal inhabitants is part of the Australian identity. Yeah.
Yeah.
I do.
That's interesting.
I reckon we've gone backwards from Yotha Yindian Treaty, though, 20 years ago.
Yeah, because it was a great song. We haven't had a good Indigenous song really at that scale of treaty since then.
All we need is a song and we'll solve
that was
the
a
problem.
banger.
Hey, Nor, the other drink that we drink, but it's your turn. Like news media, it's not called the bargaining code. I think it's called the bargaining incentive.
It is.
You were intricate in the last round of negotiations where your enemies' enemies became your friends, and there was a united front.
I went before the Senate committee with News Corp. I did.
And you have a shower afterwards?
No, they were actually, we actually really agreed. And
yeah, no.
They're quite.
What's your take on where things are up to now? Because it's slightly different. My understanding of it is that the government says we're going to tax you unless you do a deal, but the tax is going to be higher than the deal. Go off and do deals. Is that
correct?
Like, A, is it good policy? B, do you think it's going to deliver what the sticker says?
I think it's reasonable policy in that you pay the tax whether you are running news or not. So the situation that caused difficulties last time we met, it went, okay, we're out of here, we're not running news, so we don't have to do deals, can't reoccur. I think there are definite discussions to be had and hurdles, one of which is obviously the platforms don't want to pay the tax. They are saying it's a digital services tax. They will complain to Trump. That might lead either to retaliatory tariffs or to some sort of legal WTO-style legal challenge in the States, which was one of the design features of the former code was designed to try and avoid that more so than this one. I think there's also potentially issues in that it says the government was trying to soften the blow for the platforms, like you don't have to go and do a deal with every single person and their cat. However, they said you have to do 4 deals. Now, that could mean that, the ABC, News, 9 and 7 do deals and everyone else is locked out. And I think there's a lot of nervousness among smaller players about that. I'm not at The Guardian anymore, but if I were at The Guardian still, I would be quite nervous about that because there's incentives to do deals with much smaller players. I worry that The Guardian might be a bit sort of stuck in between the two parts of the policy. So I think there's a long way to go.
Is it for large? So, Lenore, is it for large, or could they just go, we'll do a deal with The Conversation, with Crikey, with The Guardian? Well,
they've got to actually make up the amount of money. Like they've got to. So I don't think so, no.
Sorry.
To my mind, the bigger problem is that the whole thing is sort of being superseded over time by AI. Like the bigger problem for media organizations
yesterday's
now
battle
is that the AI companies are hoovering up at what we do, often without paying, and giving it back to people in AI.
I thought you said you guys
summaries.
offered it for free.
Pardon?
I thought you said you guys offered it for free. Wasn't that the
to
whole
humans?
spiel?
No. I think.
Well,
I mean, if
hang on.
someone's going to
Suddenly
make
you're discriminating against
if someone's going to make money out of it, then I think they should give us a payment.
So it's one of those terms and conditions apply. Hey, can I ask you a genuine question?
Doesn't The Guardian have a deal with one of the AI companies though for their content?
Yes. But I mean, as a general, but not with all of them. And as a general point, the premise of the original News Media Bargaining Code and this was the hoovering up by the platforms of the digital advertising revenue. And that is increasingly less of a problem than the hoovering up of what we do and the giving it back to people in summaries, which don't mention us and which we weren't paid for the input data. So it's still relevant, but it's going to be less relevant over time. And those AI companies are going to be different from the three platforms that are hit by this. So now it's Facebook, Meta, and TikTok is now hit by the NBI as well. I think
LinkedIn for
Google's
some
pissed
reason.
off that LinkedIn is that they think that Microsoft LinkedIn should be in as well. But so there's going to be a lot of detail argued about. But basically, it's an okay design, I think.
But Lenore, I genuinely want to understand this. So I was a huge, supporter of the News Media Bargaining Code, which was the original one.
Yep.
And now this is the News Media Bargaining Incentive, as you mentioned. One of the big design differences is if I'm TikTok and I go, okay, cool, fair enough, I don't want to pay you any money, so I'm just not going to carry your news, I still have to pay a tax for news that I'm not publishing or disseminating. How is that not a digital services tax? Like, how is that not just a tax on, hey, you're a digital company?
An extremely good question, and one the platforms are likely to prosecute with the President of the United States. Yes, I think I agree. I agree with you.
Then when have we previously hypothecated a tax to one industry, which is my other
taxes. Taxes. This is my point here, Peter, is this is exactly what we did with Uber and taxes in New South Wales. We went, Uber's illegal, you're not operating illegally. And then everyone went, yeah, but we really like Uber. We're not going to stop using Uber. And we're not going to go back to taxis just because you don't like it. Also, they haven't innovated over the past 40 years. It's a bit shit. It smells. And they always overcharge me. We're going to go to Uber instead. And then the government went, oh, fuck, we've got to support the taxi industry somehow. So why don't we put a $1.10 flagfall on every fare? This is the exact same thing where we're going, hang on a minute.
But you're saying the media is like a taxi that's smelly and corrupt? Well,
to some degree, no, but let's look at this objectively away from our individual roles in journalism and all that. You go, it's not like journalists didn't know the digital revolution was coming. They didn't know, it's not like they didn't know that these changes were happening. They chose not to invest in the innovation. They chose not to change their platforms. They chose not to build the tools that would attract people.
Wait up a sec. What innovation do you think would have avoided the decline in advertising revenue to the platforms or the AI challenge now? Like, what the hell could we have done?
So again, The Guardian's somewhat of an exception here in the UK, but you look at the Australian market, most of these platforms had to be pulled kicking and screaming from print editions into digital editions. They were late to the game compared to their US counterparts. While the whole world had moved to the internet, here they were still like, okay, well, we'll publish it the next day online in a truncated format.
Okay, so you mean like if they'd actually got the Rivers of Gold and set that up as businesses online, that's what you're talking about? Yeah, okay, that's a fair point.
The thing that made them the most money, the classifieds, it was not hard to see. When the internet came around in the early 90s, oh shit, people are moving this online.
That was one of the reasons why I wanted to go to The Guardian, by the way, because we were trying to convince Fairfax to do live blogs, and they were like, no, we don't want to do that.
Yeah, and that's the thing, is it took them 2 decades to try to innovate. By the time they did, most of the market was eaten away by the Facebooks, Googles, Craigslists in the US and all the other markets around the world. And then they went, oh, all our revenue's gone. We need some money, please, government. Can you tax those guys that took all our revenue away because they get the ads, not us? It's like, well, where did your money go? Just to shareholders?
But I don't, I mean, I think I accept your point that the Australian media companies were slow off the mark with going digital. That's true. But I think, they had, even if, I think there were bigger forces at play that were eroding their ad revenue on site as well. Like it's not only that was happening.
Oh, of course. But that's any business has macro forces at play, right? And you have to respond to the conditions. But it's not to say that they were blindsided by this overnight change where their ad revenue suddenly disappeared, gradually diminished over a period of 20 years, in which time most of these platforms chose not to innovate their way out.
Anyway,
but by your argument, then the media all around the world were equally flat-footed because everybody is under the same cost pressures. Like and it's only the very big companies that have the economies of scale to sort of really be profitable now. Like small media everywhere is struggling.
And would you be happy that the media disappears, Dame, and it's just
no, absolutely not. What I'm delighted is in its place, what we've seen is a blossoming of new independent, smaller, whether you want to call them boutique or garden variety artisanal medias that are either industry specific or area specific have cropped up in their place, which is
They
great.
still feed off the output of the mainstream media. So many of those blog sites.
I don't think
are
Politico
still-
takes that much off the newswire. They service a very specific clientele. Capital Brief here in Australia does the exact same thing.
fair.
There's plenty of examples. That's the
I've got-
innovation cycle.
I've got no problem with that argument if the sites you're talking about are actually doing journalism. The problem I have is that a lot of what is flooding people's news feeds is online opinion and all sorts of things. But I got no problem with that in and of itself. Like, the more the merrier. Like, have a political debate. I love that. But it's not the same thing as journalism. It's not finding out stuff you wouldn't know if we weren't here, which should be the mainstay of a journalist's job. I worry that we, in an old-fashioned newspaper, you used to have like 20 news stories for one opinion piece. I reckon now we'd have like 500 opinions for one news story. Like the shoe leather journalism of holding people to account that we always blather on about and finding
It's
stuff out that
expensive,
people
isn't
wouldn't
it?
know and going to AGMs and putting in FOIs. There's so far fewer people doing that, and so many more people putting their mugs on Instagram and giving you their 2 cents worth.
Yeah. No. I mean,
Anyway,
look,
just
that's
to
exactly
round
what
it
me and
off-
Peter are doing here. But sorry, just to follow up on that.
And me.
No,
Just
but
to round it
you're a
off-
qualified journalist, Lenore. Please don't degrade
Qualified.
yourself to our level. But
There
can I
is
just
actually-
add to that? And again, not to be the rude capitalist here, but people have demonstrated with their clicks, feet, and dollars that they don't give enough of a shit about the journalism. And not everyone, but overwhelmingly, they're not buying the quarterly essays or some are subscribing to The Economist, but not a lot. They're not buying those things. They're happy to take the sugar hits, not the vegetables. And you're right. In the old newspapers, we'd give people, a few sugar hits and their daily dose of vegetables that they need to get. That model didn't survive.
News Corp announced a record profit today. The Guardian is profitable. Nine is profitable. So, and I also think that you hit a tipping point where there's so much AI slop and so much stuff. I mean, my argument was always people are going to come back because
This is Dan's
or are
theory as
sticking
well.
with us because they know they can trust that it's
Yeah.
true.
Hey, just to round out this conversation, which is terrific, I do think it's beautiful that all the media companies are putting out joint releases and holding hands and singing Kumbaya. I was quite involved in the last round of News Media Value Code. I was doing some advocacy with the Australia Institute. I have never had a better run in the media than when I was arguing for more money for the media. I was being asked
Remember
to write
what Paul
op-eds
Keating
left,
said?
right, and centre.
Remember
It
what
was
Paul
great.
Keating said, Peter?
Uh,
Back the horse
boy.
called self-interest.
I think
At least it's trying.
for what it's worth, just to round this out before we talk very quickly about budget next week, because we're already at 50 minutes. I think the AI slop, while I don't disagree with you, it is slop. The speed of the AI slop moving from slop to what we might traditionally consider pretty good journalism will be a faster journey than any of us expect. And I think it will get there.
Reckon this is a discussion for another day, which I'm not sure you're right. I think it's hit a wall and people are smelling the slop, including Klaus's slop now. And so just so you know, Lenore,
I know, I've seen
Dame
it.
puts a daily bit of slop out. And it's not like I love Klaus, like as much
He's
as I
great.
can love a predictive text engine. But there is a world. So my mate Nick Davis has got this megapixel theory. I'll just run it with you guys here. So remember, everyone used to think, how many megapixels do you have in your camera? And it used to mean a thing because it meant it was a better photo. But at some point, it gets so good that it doesn't matter how many megapixels. It's just a really good photo. And his theory is that the LLMs have kind of got to that point now, and they're not going to go much further. And now there's going to be a period of consolidation, working out what they're useful for and what they're not. And writing is not something they're useful for. You can smell it. It is not good. And
But
people,
in any event, they can't find out information that isn't already there. Like by definition, they can't. They
can't
can't.
do journalism.
They can't
maybe-
do journalism. They can very happily summarize something.
To
And if
explain
that
why,
kind of
just
strange
for our
monkey journalism,
listeners-
fine, do it. I don't care. But
Lenore, for our
the
listeners,
profit-
explain why they can't do it.
Well, because I mean, okay, let's say you want to find you know, a source tells you that a minister's corrupt, and you want to you put in 5 FOIs, and you have coffee with 6 people, and someone gives you a clue about something, and then you go and ask someone else, and you triangulate it all, and you put together and you write a story. There's no way that AI can do that. If there were bits of that information available on the internet somewhere, they could suck it all in incredibly effectively, but they couldn't go and find the pieces of information that weren't already there.
I'm not sure that's entirely true. It's a great point of view. I'm not sure that's
I
entirely true,
reckon
and
this
I'm
is a
not sure that will be
conversation for
true
another
for
day because
in
we're
another
kind
6
of
months. Because
running it.
I think other than the physical coffee, there's no other bits of that you couldn't get AI to do today. Not necessarily well, but you could get it to do today.
We should
Dumb
continue
intern.
this conversation.
Dumb
Oh, I'm
intern.
very excited to have this. Tell me about. We've got budget next week. It's going to be a big budget.
Yeah, let's do our predictions for the week because I feel like this is the roundout. So this is our shout section. I don't know if I warned you about this, Lenore, but you've got to give us your prediction for the week. But we'll start off with Dharma. He's probably going to be hanging around Canberra.
Yes, I'll be hanging around Canberra like a bad smell next week. Looking forward to all the rubber chickens. I think it's going to be a painful budget for a lot of people, but potentially the budget Chalmers needs to pass, which is what I'm really interested. The changes, as we've discussed at length, Peter Lewis, CGT and negative gearing in this country have to fucking change if anyone under 40 has a hope of owning a house. I'm shocked and surprised that the Albo government hasn't tried this sooner, but I guess they feel hopefully emboldened enough to do this now, where we overturn the overly generous tax benefits we give to old landowners and old house owners so that young people can actually have a parcel of Australia to call their home.
And I also note that Tim Wilson's Uncle Jeff is out there again playing his greatest hits from
Yep.
2019.
Yeah.
Being everybody up. Do you reckon they're going to have a go at family tax as well, which family trusts, which I think
I'm not
is
sure.
because the problem with like family trusts are the biggest rort, but the only people that know it's a rort are people that have family trusts. Like if other
People have enough
knew
money to
what
put it
was
into a
going
trust.
on,
You've got to have
like,
enough money to pay the accountants and the lawyers.
Yeah.
But it's kind of connected too, isn't it? Because people own properties through their trusts.
Yeah. It's wild.
Yeah.
What's
Yeah,
your prediction for the budget, Lenore?
I don't have a
Or for the week?
prediction, more a kind of something I'm perversely looking forward to. I agree with what Damien said about the capital gains tax and negative gearing, like bring it on, long overdue. But I'm really looking forward to the spluttering opinion pieces in some of the papers from wealthy owners of multiple properties screaming about intergenerational warfare and how it's all really unfair and how they might have to sell their 49th home.
I just want to see how dominant the grandfather is in the conversation. Like my concern as someone that is sort of invested in Labor having a successful second term is that they make it look really big, but then when you peel it away, everything's grandfathered and it's on the never and it's not going to have.
That's my honest concern from a citizen perspective, is that it's going to look like it has teeth, but ultimately it's going to be a cardboard cutout that falls over, much like the fucking housing fund where nothing's been built. It's going to be one of these things where it's a great announcement, but nothing behind.
But the other thing that I'm interested in is I'm a bit obsessed by this. I think the economy is going to go a lot further south than people expect. And I'm going to be really interested in what the projections are because, with best case scenario, if this, blockade in the Middle East ended tomorrow, the tail on that is months and months and months and months. These ships move at the pace of a push bike. Australia will be okay with fuel supply because we've done all the deals, but it's going to be more expensive. That's going to flow right through the economy because we're an energy-based economy. So I'm interested in whether that's being factored in, because if it's not factored into the budget, it is just going to be a chimera.
And somehow Woolies will make a record profit again, and we'll keep swiping those everyday rewards cards and hoping they give us some back.
And the budget will have to make some assumptions about how long it goes on, which will be interesting.
So I think that's going to be the most interesting, and it's going to be almost tea leaves, but I think that's going to be the real story. I think without this would be their reform, this is why we have
This is
Labor
the year.
governments,
Yeah.
people, this is it. But this constraint, it's worse than the GFC. It's probably as significant as the pandemic that you guys dealt with, Damo. Like, it will not
But a slower
business as usual.
Band-Aid to pull off. It's going to be a
Mm.
real slow burn for people. I'm excited for next week regardless. I look forward to it. If you're sad enough to watch The Budget, Tuesday night, 7 p.m, should be a lot of fun. Jim Chalmers and Budget and Reply on Thursday by Angus Taylor, the Leader of the Opposition. I was just going to say big thank you to you, Lenore, that this has been amazing.
It's been
Stay on the
fun.
line. Stay on the line with us
Come
for a
back.
minute. Peter,
Yeah.
as it always and every week, thank you for a lively, interesting and challenging conversation. I appreciate you.
You're my favourite evil twin, Damo.
You're
Let's
my
do it
favourite.
again.
Thank you,
Cheers.
everyone. We'll see you again next week.
Bye.
See you.